This is BBC News. I'm Yalda Hakim, live from Ukraine's western city of Lviv. Our top stories. Civilians in Ukraine have been fleeing for their lives under the relentless bombardment just 25 kilometers from the capital. A second attempt to evacuate civilians from the besieged city of Mariupol has failed after a similar plan was abandoned yesterday due to continuing fighting. The UN says 1.5 million people have already fled Ukraine. The US offers to help ease the fastest growing refugee crisis since the Second World War. Anti-war protests on the streets of Russia. 3,500 people have been arrested in protests across the country, according to the Russian news agency TASS. Yalda Hakim, coming to you live from western Ukraine. Well, fighting continues across Ukraine and especially in the northeast and south of the country. Let's just bring you up to date on what we're hearing from Ukrainian authorities who say towns northwest of the capital, Kiev, are under relentless bombardment with intense fighting between government and Russian forces. Well, let's just show you some of this on a map. The heaviest fighting is said to be focused on the suburbs just 25 kilometers northwest of Kiev, the capital. Meanwhile, a new temporary ceasefire to evacuate thousands of civilians in the besieged southern city of Mariupol appears to have collapsed after just 2 hours. This is the second day in a row that it has collapsed, and as we've been reporting, the Ukrainian authorities asked civilians to stay where they were, to seek shelter, because they would be giving more information about how to evacuate. But as we've also been reporting, they continue to come under heavy bombardment. Charlotte Gallagher has the very latest. A Russian strike on Irpin. Violence, destruction, panic. This city close to the capital is enduring heavy fighting, with more and more people attempting to escape. Many are heading to Lviv, a city close to the Polish border. The train station here is overwhelmed by the crowds. These children from an orphanage are some of the latest to leave. For one of their carers, it's just too much. My heart is being torn apart, she says. It's so tough. A few miles from the train station, weapons are being handed out, not to soldiers and police, but ordinary citizens who want to defend their city, families and Ukraine. It's a scene repeated across the country.
We have already gained our future, but we are still fighting for our present. It is very important. We are still fighting for where the border will be, between life and slavery. This is the time when it is still possible to defeat evil without irreparable losses.
The abandoned streets of Mariupol, a city under siege, encircled by Russian troops, around 200,000 people have been running out of food, water and power, living in darkness in cellars. Yesterday, the hope of escape was dashed after Russian shelling broke a ceasefire agreed to allow people to leave, though Moscow blamed Ukraine. Today, there will be another attempt to evacuate civilians. The city's mayor says they are under constant threat.
In the first days of the war, we counted the victims in tens. Today, we count them in hundreds. Soon we'll count them in thousands. They won't even give us the chance to count the wounded and the dead, because the shelling has not stopped for 6 days.
This is what people here fear, strikes from the sky. Despite Moscow's promises, the Russian Air Force have hit houses, schools and hospitals, not only military targets. Putin's prize target is the capital, Kyiv, though, the scars of war already visible. On the outskirts, troops and volunteers are in position and defences are being rapidly erected, like these anti-tank hedgehogs. The resistance remains defiant. Charlotte Gallagher, BBC News, Lviv. Well, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has been speaking day and night about the ongoing conflict, and he's said today that Russian rockets had completely destroyed a civilian airport in the central western region of Vinnytsia. That's on Sunday, and he also said earlier that authorities had been working to put out a fire after that rocket strike. Let's just have a listen to what he had to say.
I've just been told about the rocket strike at Vinnytsia. 8 rockets against our town, against our peaceful, good Vinnytsia that never threatened Russia by any way. A rocket strike, tough, cynical, completely flattened the airport. They carry on destroying our infrastructure, our lives, built by us, by our fathers, by our grandfathers and grandmothers, by generations of Ukrainians. Every day we keep saying, close the sky over Ukraine to all Russian rockets, to Russian military aviation, to all those terrorists, and made a humanitarian air zone without rockets, without planes. We are people. Your humanitarian responsibility is to protect us, to protect people. You can do that. If you don't do that, if you won't at least give us planes for us to be able to protect ourselves, that only one conclusion could be drawn. You also want us to be very slowly killed. And that is the responsibility of global politicians and Western leaders from today and forever.
You're listening there to Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, making that appeal, that very angry, frustrated appeal about Russian rocket attacks on that civilian airport. And you can hear the frustration in his voice. Let's also hear from a former Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yulia Tymoshenko, who was speaking to us via a translator. She also made an appeal to the international community for more assistance. Have a listen.
Ukraine is being absolutely plummeted by missile strikes. Children are dying, peaceful people, women are dying. Currently, everything is being shot at close range. I just want to thank everyone for your support. We really value tough sanctions against the aggressor. We value today that the world gives us arms, that the world is with us, but today it's not enough. In order for Ukraine to hold on, for everyone, for Europe, for the world, in front of the aggressor, the Russian Federation that crossed all borders, we require serious help. That help is closing the sky over Ukraine. Today, this is as a prayer repeated by Ukrainian children which are hiding in bomb shelters. Our Ukrainian mothers are repeating this as a prayer. We need your help. If the sky is closed over Ukraine for Russian military aviation and for missile strikes, Ukraine will prevail. And together with the whole civilized world, now I want to address the mothers of the world. To women, I ask you, please stand with Ukraine. I just want to say that our army is fighting strong. Today, normal men and women are out on the streets. They were given arms, but even without arms, they are stopping tanks. Our cities are occupied, but we are strong. Our faith is strong, and we know we will win together with the whole civilized world.
That was Yulia Tymoshenko, the former Prime Minister of Ukraine. The United States is now considering sending planes from Poland, fighter jets, to assist Ukraine in this conflict. Yesterday, when President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed the US Senate, he actually requested Russian-made aircraft to assist the military because he says they know how to fly them, how to use them. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landell has this report.
What Ukraine wants is more air cover, more planes like these keeping the skies free from Russian attacks. And so now there's a plan for the West to give more jets to Ukraine for its... What Ukraine says it really wants is a no-fly zone enforced by NATO. in an attempt to slow the Russian onslaught on its cities. But NATO said no, fearing it would trigger a wider European war. And all the while, the flow of refugees out of Ukraine continues to grow. Today, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, said they number more than 1.5 million people, what he described as the fastest growing refugee crisis in Europe since World War II.
I think help of other country is very important for us, really. It's really good.
As Western economic sanctions begin to have an impact in Moscow, Visa and MasterCard announced that they would cease their operations in Russia. Banks in Russia insisted that cards issued by them would continue to work. James Landell, BBC News.
Hello there. The situation is even worse than you say, because not only did they encircle the city and occupy it, and so we can see the Russian armored personnel carriers and Russian soldiers patrolling the streets of the city. We also have a full blockade on any supply routes and any movement of civilians, which is now prohibited by Russians. Several supply convoys already sent by volunteers, including Red Cross, as well as Ukrainian government, are simply not being allowed into the city, despite the agreements reached between Russia and Ukraine at the most recent high-level talks between the governments. So the city, albeit small, is on the verge of humanitarian catastrophe, as the food supplies, medicine, bottled water, all is running scarce. You can see people queuing up in the streets, just looking for a shop that sells at least anything, and often not finding anything at all. Despite this, my fellow Khersonians has mounted a civil protest that is aimed at showing the Russians that despite the physical fact of occupation, we are still standing strong with the whole of Ukraine. We still consider ourselves Ukrainian, and we will wait and we'll do as much as we can to support our country and every attempt of liberating the city.
How are you doing that at the moment? Are you coming out onto the streets? Is it safe for you to do so?
I'm afraid it's not that safe. We have heard reports and seen footage of quite gruesome acts of aggression perpetrated by the Russians. We've seen people shot on sight for no clear reason, because some of those people are women who definitely did not carry any guns or anything threatening. So what I could assume is just Russians consider us some sort of Chechnya, where everyone is ready to fight them with tooth and nail, with bare hands. In terms of the rallies that have been held for the past couple of days, it's more of a civilian daylight protest. So the Russians do not interfere that much, albeit they still discourage anyone from coming too close. So I guess it takes a great deal of courage from every Khersonian in the protest to leave their daily activities like finding food and supplies, and instead to go to the rally just to show the Russians they are not welcome in the city as long as they bear arms, and that the city is not exactly happy with their presence.
And Oleg, it's freezing conditions. Is there any heating?
Yeah, most of the city is now restored for most of the utilities. Although I've been hearing reports of the suburban areas like Antonievka, where heavy fighting took place since day one of the war, that they still have issues with electricity and gas supply, or water supply just as well. Most of the city is having all the communications needed, except for mobile network, which is turned down for the second time for the past 2 days.
Oleg, a devastating situation there in Kherson. Thank you very much for joining us here on the program. Well, as as Oleg was saying there, it's devastation in so many of these cities where people's homes have been completely destroyed, their lives have been completely destroyed, and they're looking for a way out. Those who have been lucky enough to escape the fighting and make their way to the west of the country, to places like here in Lviv, have also started to move on, and we do know that 1.5 million people, in excess of 1.5 million people, have now left this country. Their figures, according to the United Nations, who say that there's an avalanche of humans leaving this country, the largest movement of people since the Second World War, of refugees who have left the country. The bulk of the people are heading to Poland, where my colleague Kasia Madera has been reporting from the Polish-Ukrainian border.
Amongst so much uncertainty and so much destruction that has happened in Ukraine just across the border from me, one thing is constant: the flow of people coming through. These people have just crossed over the border from Ukraine. Their journeys to get here have been long, they've been uncertain. We've been seeing the scenes back in Lviv of what has been happening as the people have been crossing into trains, crossing through with their cars, leaving their cars running out of fuel, crossing by foot, like all of these people that have just literally crossed the border here into Poland. Their first time to have an opportunity to just get something warm to drink, their first time to get something to eat. This whole community, this whole centre has popped up and is very transient. We've been here all week, things change, tents pop up, tents go, but what is constant also, along with the flow of people coming across the border, is the support that Poland is offering to those people who have fled. Volunteers in their hundreds, bringing off, dropping off things that all the children may need, the piles of nappies, the milk formula, the food for the children who are exhausted and they're overwhelmed. And what is really, really touching is just the little moments of generosity, how people just bring people that have fled the border into their homes, opening their homes. But this is the absolute first moment these people have crossed into this country, and there is a sense of calmness and there is a sense of just exhaustion given what they have been through. There is organisation. We see all the time people coming up explaining, we've got a person who is travelling to Krakow, we can take 4 or 5 people. We've got a person who is driving on to another town who can take a family of, and then gives the amount. And this is continuous. This is absolutely continuous. We've got people who have brought bits of paper explaining, we'll take such and such, we'll take you on, we'll provide you transport, things for free. And this is happening all the time, every day, day in, day out on this border as the people come across. And yes, it is cold here. It is snowing every now and again. Bear in mind the people that have just come across, they have spent days getting to the border. But this is the next leg of their journey. So here we have this queue of people waiting to get on a bus. A bus will then take them to the next part of their stage, of their journey, to temporary reception areas. It's where Antony Blinken came to see one of these reception areas, how it was organised, how people got to rest, and then they move on. Across the whole of Poland, people are opening up their doors, websites offering advice of what to do if you want to take a refugee family in. Large Ukrainian community in Poland, they're all coming together, bringing these people to their homes. Again, another bus coming up. Every few minutes, a bus will come up, will load these people on, will move them further away, because ultimately we know that more and more people continue to cross this border. Already, over 900,000 people have come into Poland. That is higher than the population of Poland's second largest city, Krakow, coming into this country in such a short space of time. They all need help, they all need attention, they all need rest.
Kasia Madera reporting there from the Poland-Ukraine border. Extraordinary numbers of people. Kasia saying that 900,000 people have made their way into Poland. We do know that over 1.5 million people have now left the fighting. And it's not just Poland that they're going to. There are 5 countries that border Ukraine in the west and the south of the country, and people are using other avenues, other countries, other ways to leave Ukraine and to leave the fighting. Rob Cameron has the latest from Slovakia.
10,000 people a day crossing into Slovakia from Ukraine. 10,000 journeys, 10,000 stories, each similar, each unique, each terrifying in their own way. Svetlana is an English teacher from the town of Korosten, who fled with her 7-year-old son Ilya and their cat.
Staying without your house, without your clothes, because we went out just with nothing. Like, we were hoping that we can come back at least someday, but I don't know, as far as watching those news, I'm losing my hope, actually.
For now, she's heading to the Polish city of Wrocław to stay with friends. Central and Eastern Europe is home to a huge Ukrainian diaspora. In homes across the region this evening, people will be making up spare beds for their kin. And those who have no one in Warsaw, Bratislava or Prague will be put up by an army of willing volunteers. But not all of these people fleeing the conflict are Ukrainians. Russia's war has scattered thousands of migrant workers and students. Most of them are trying to get home as quickly as possible, but not everyone. Foreigners from all over the world were studying in Ukraine when the war started, some just months away from completing their degrees.
It's 6 years already. I've been doing my thing. I've been studying late night for exams. I had plans in my life, like I'll do this, I'll write my exam, I'll go to another country, I'll become something in my life. But now it's like, I don't know what to do, really.
Degrees can be finished, of course, but lives lost can't be relived. The Red Army once liberated this part of Europe, and Slovaks haven't forgotten. But now their neighbours are fleeing Russian tanks, not welcoming them. And countries like Slovakia are the ones providing the shelter. Rob Cameron, BBC News, on the Slovak-Ukrainian border.
Well, as the fighting rages on here in Ukraine, there have been demonstrations across Russia for the past week, and there really has been an intense crackdown by the authorities on those who have been protesting. We understand that the protests have gone as far as Siberia. They began in Moscow and have also, we've seen people come out onto the streets in St. Petersburg as well. The Interior Ministry said almost 4,000 demonstrators have been detained, many of them, as I've said, in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Maria Ketsnotsova, spokesperson for the OVD Info Monitoring Group, said the screws are being fully tightened. Essentially, we are witnessing military censorship. And she added, as we've said, that there have been big protests, even in Siberian cities. So a real attempt at showing solidarity with what's happening here in Ukraine. Russians risking their lives in support of the Ukrainian people and demanding no war, but they are being arrested and detained by the authorities there in Russia. And as we've reported, at least 4,000 people have been arrested across the country, the majority of them in Moscow and St. Petersburg. We've also been seeing protests as far as Siberia.